Sheikh Hamdan's wife hired someone to follow him. What they found shocked her. She did not make the decision lightly. That is the first thing to understand about what she did and why she did it. Hiring someone to follow your husband is not a decision that a woman of her dignity and composure arrives at easily. It is the decision at the end of a long road, a road that began with feeling something was wrong and moved through patience and presence and every form of trying to address the wrongness through the channels available to a woman in her position before arriving finally at the conclusion that the channels available to her were not going to produce the information she needed. She had tried everything else. She had watched, she had listened, she had carried the shape of the knowing without the specifics for long enough that the carrying had become its own form of damage. And then she made the decision. She hired someone to follow the Crown Prince of Dubai. And what they found, what the specific, documented, detailed evidence of the following produced, was not what she had expected to find. Or rather, it was more than she had expected to find. More specific, more real, more permanent in its implications than the worst version of what she had been imagining. The person she hired operated at the level of discretion that the situation required. This was not a casual investigation. This was not the kind of following that produces grainy photographs and incomplete timelines. She needed information that was reliable enough to be worth the risk she was taking by seeking it. Information that would answer the questions she had been carrying rather than simply adding new questions to the ones she already had. The person she found was experienced in exactly the kind of situation she was bringing to them. The specific situation of a powerful man maintaining a private life alongside an official one, using the resources and the access and the management infrastructure of his position to keep the two worlds from touching. Following someone like that required a different level of skill than following an ordinary person. She found someone with that level of skill, and she paid for the information she received with the specific price that information of this kind always costs. Not just money, but the knowledge that in asking for it, she had already accepted that the answer was going to change something. The following began in the days when Hamdan's schedule had one of those gaps. Not large enough to be a formal trip, not small enough to be simply an unaccounted hour, but the specific medium-sized gap that his schedule had been producing with increasing frequency and that the official explanations for had become increasingly inadequate. He left the palace with the smaller footprint that private departures always have compared to official ones. Fewer people, less advanced preparation. The specific quiet of a man who is going somewhere that does not require the apparatus of the crown prince to accompany him. The person she had hired was already in position. What they found began with a location, a part of the city or its outskirts or a property accessible from the city that she had not known about. Not a hotel, not the kind of temporary arrangement that would have suggested something less significant than what it actually was. A residence, established enough to have the quality of somewhere that had been in use, somewhere that had been in use for long enough to have become familiar, to have the specific quality of a place that is lived in rather than visited. She received this information first, before the other information. And the residence alone, its existence, its location, its established quality, told her enough that the information that followed was not going to be a surprise so much as a confirmation. The confirmation came in the form of who was there. She had a name, a version of a name, the name that had been connected to the feeling she had been carrying, but the name had been an abstraction, a connection she suspected without being able to pin down. What the following produced was not a name but a reality, a woman, present in the residence in the way that someone is present in a place that belongs to them, not visiting, not passing through, but there in the ordinary domestic way of someone for whom this is where the daily texture of life happens. And with her, this was the part that went beyond what she had been prepared for. Children, small ones, of an age that did not require complicated mathematics to connect to a specific period of time, a period of time that had a very specific relationship to her marriage. The children were the shock. She had anticipated a woman, had carried the shape of a woman in the feeling she had been managing since the early months of the marriage. But children were different. Children were permanent in a way that a relationship, however real and however long, was not permanent in quite the same sense. Children changed the scale of what she was looking at from something that was primarily about her marriage to something that was about the entire architecture of his life. An architecture that had a different structure than the one she had been told she was part of. She looked at the information she had received and understood that she had not found evidence of an affair. She had found evidence of a parallel family, something that predated the marriage, had continued through it, and had produced people who were going to exist in the world long after any official arrangement between herself and Hamdan had reached whatever conclusion it was going to reach. She sat with the information for longer than most people would have been able to sit with it. That quality, the ability to receive something significant and process it fully before acting on it, had always been part of how she navigated the marriage. The information sat with her through the days in which she decided what she was going to do with it. She did not immediately confront. She did not immediately call the palace management. She did not immediately make any of the moves that the information made available to her. She sat with it, and in the sitting, she arrived at the specific clarity that comes from having looked at the full shape of something rather than the partial version that the management of the official story had always made available. What she did next followed from that clarity, not reactively, not with the kind of explosive response that the scale of what she had found might have produced in someone with less capacity for measured response. With the specific deliberateness of a woman who had asked a question, by hiring the person who found the answer and who was now in possession of the answer in its fullest form and who was going to act on it in a way that reflected the full understanding of what she had received rather than the shock of the first few moments of receiving it. She had hired someone to follow him. What they found shocked her, not because it was impossible, because it was real. Because the shape she had been carrying as a feeling for years had been given specifics, a residence, a woman, children of a specific age, and the specifics had made the feeling into a fact. And facts, once they arrive in a life, do not go back to being feelings, they stay in the specific, permanent way of things that have been confirmed by evidence, rather than simply suspected through feeling. She was in possession of a fact now, and she was going to live in the fact rather than the feeling for the rest of whatever the marriage had left to produce. Subscribe to this channel and hit the bell. Every week, I bring you the real story of Sheikh Hamdan, the investigations that produce the truth, the facts that replace the feelings, and the woman who hired someone to follow her husband and received an answer that was bigger than the question she thought she was asking.